Guys, another CEO Wisdom podcast with a special invitee today, Michael Kiel. He is CEO at NTIA. NTIA stands for Nighttime Industries Association in London, UK. He represents over 100 nightclubs. Me and Mike have been discussing interesting stuff before we started, amongst other rugby, mixed martial arts, how to defend yourself. Because Mike has been in that industry for quite some time. Mike, if you can introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about yourself and NTIA.
Thanks, Charles, and thanks for inviting me on. I mean, look, I started on a health career, to be honest with you, so I didn't naturally come from culture or hospitality or nighttime economy. I've come from a very different sort of background and started doing very much. I actually looked to train to be a physiotherapist, so it was completely different. That was my rugby background, but fell into this job, started working in a nightclub on the south coast of England, and built from there. Worked in the corporate environment and really sort of grew. And over the course of 25, 30 years, I've gained so much experience in running festivals and events. I was a drum and bass promoter. I was a commercial director for a student union. I've had such an array of different experiences. So it really suited me coming into this role, although, to be honest, I never thought I'd be so front-facing as I have been since, because I think I started the role as a CEO about a year and a bit just before the pandemic. So as you can appreciate, coming into this role and also being thrust into the media limelight was probably an astounding experience, something that I'd never experienced. And as you can appreciate, it's a sink and swim moment. And luckily, I'm a decent swimmer, or I can float well, so we've done all right. But still lots of work to do. Exciting times, lots of things to get our teeth into and work on. But my passion is the industry. It's something I've lived and breathed for so long now. It's given me so much. I want to give back as much as I can.
So tell us about the industry itself. I've never gone to, actually, I did go to your European clubs that were pretty badass. So in my Euro trip, when I started at 18, I got drunk for a good 2 weeks, and then I quit alcohol. Well, quit alcohol. I never really got real drunk after that ever again. Thank God for that, because that Euro trip was quite wild. I did not visit any club in London though. The nightlife is quite special. There's these pubs and all of that. How is the nightlife there? Let's start with that.
I mean, nightlife is phenomenal. I mean, it's such a huge array of different experiences, from your traditional pub where you'll go and have a traditional pint, to your sort of late night bar, to your casinos, your live music venues, or your electronic music venues, the likes of Fabric and Ministry of Sound, or things like the Royal Albert Hall. And so we've got a huge array of businesses out there that we represent that are just phenomenal. And I think what people don't really understand is how important they are to cities and towns and communities up and down the country, not only in terms of shaping communities, but they also influence things like socio-economic status, and and they have a real sort of piece to play in terms of people's physical, social, and mental well-being. But I think the important thing, is really to understand is people now understand the importance of work-life balance. So there are a lot of people, a lot of big companies now researching the areas they're moving their offices to, their head offices, because they understand that they've got to keep their workforce stimulated. And the stimulation goes beyond the office and into the evening and nighttime economy. And, we talk about students that go to universities, but students pick a university because of the course. And the second thing they look at is, what's the nightlife like? What's going out? What's that social engagement piece? What culture's available? That's why people at places like Manchester, Bristol, Sheffield, and London are thriving with this student economy, is because they do so well with their evening and nighttime economy. So for us, it's a huge part of the UK, something which is probably undervalued, if I'm going to be really honest, by UK government, and something we're trying to correct and remedy with it.
I often reflect on my past life, from 15 to 20. Yeah, I've got like blackout drunk on every weekend. And so did my friend. You know, it was a competition of who would get the most drunk. We're from Quebec, right? You might notice the French accent, and the culture there is really much like let's get drunk and passed out. Um, but and I reflect almost with to that period with some kind of shame, but I do think that this period of my life, although like yeah, the multiple negative effect on my brain, it did help shape the social Charles, because sometimes I wish that I would have discovered entrepreneurship in that period. But is that like wrongful thinking? Is it a phase of life that every youngsters need to go through?
I think there are phases in life. There are obviously extremes, people who, steer themselves away for different reasons, whether it be spiritual, whether it be health orientated. But everyone goes through that process. We saw during the pandemic, there were about 850,000 new 18-year-olds who came of age. And what happened at the back end of when we reopened is the behavior and the naivety to their limitations was surreal. And we've saw that escalation of people because they didn't have the ability to go out and try and be part and understand. That naivety created almost a compromise in their safety. And we've seen lots of little outputs on that, whether it be noise, whether it be antisocial behavior, whether it be petty crime, or whether it be women's safety at night. There's a lot of things that have come off the back of it, and we seriously have to consider that the pandemic has done something in terms of people's social intelligence, if that makes sense. So it's interesting you say you're from Quebec. I actually grew up for part of my life in Alberta, in Canada. So and I played ice hockey out there for years, and it's so I completely with you when it comes to sort of Canada and that area. I absolutely love that country. So
Yeah, Quebec is like alcohol and brawls, you know. So like I had this friend, he would always one punch knockout like people that would mess with me back in these days, which is interesting to reflect on. But it's like if alcohol and we could talk about substances, but it's like if it was a part of solidifying, or it was kind of a butterfly phase to adolescence. You discover that and then you mature into something else. And I often reflect on that because nowadays my substance is caffeine, and caffeine is like the adult substance and so forth. I want to talk more about the benefit of like nightlife and fostering these communities. Obviously there's negative effect, which I think we can mitigate, like the noise, the brawls, and all of
yeah.
that. How do you manage this? Because like the inhabitants, they're like, yeah, don't make too much noise. I just want to sleep at night. Some of them also want to go out and have fun and chill. And the logic there is like 9 to 5, right? They hustle at day and chill at night, which I think still a lot of people subscribe to. So how can we focus on the positive aspects of, let's say, nightclubs and bars, and somewhat mitigate the less fun part of it?
Well, I think some of the challenges that we've had is the UK has been very slow to recognise the requirement of residential space within cities and the premise of cohabitation. So what we've done is, and sadly what we're seeing is residential spaces being built adjacent to social spaces like pubs and bars and clubs. And over a period of 2 or 3 years of cycle of ownership, we're seeing a lot of pressure placed on licenses because of noise and nuisance, where people have complained quite rightly, or they have children, or their circumstances change. So what happened within our legislation is there is a void between the people who plan to build residential spaces and the people who license pubs, bars, restaurants, and nightclubs. And they don't talk. So when the planning goes through, there is no consideration for the license or the vicinity of the license and the potential long-term nuisance. So what we're doing at the moment is retrospectively trying to look at legislation around considerations for businesses being in place and mitigations being brought in for residential spaces that are adjacent, so noise mitigation, etc., and just thinking of different ways so that we can soundproof, or if we're building a club, to soundproof a club, or think about double doors. And so there's a lot of work that's going on now, but that doesn't stop the legacy of issues that we've faced up until now. So we're still going through this tranche of deregulating and looking at planning and licensing easement, which will make a difference to protecting both the businesses and the residents, but we haven't solved it. And our issue is as every day goes by, more plans are signed off for more residential spaces, making cities or towns more congested in terms of people living there. And what we're going to find is the long-term position here is there are going to be challenges between residential spaces and commercial businesses purely on the back of the fact that we haven't remedied that position or put enough mitigations in place. And I don't think British government is proactive enough to recognise some of the work that Berlin have done about having a noise mitigation fund, or some of these other areas that actually have had to consider the impacts of these long-term developments. So for us, we're still fighting it. Without a doubt, we've got a long way to go. We've got a lot of issues to face just yet.
I partied in Berlin, for the record. It was probably one of the best parties I went through. Oddly enough, Montreal has a hell of a scene as well. Yeah, these DJs venues, which I still attend to nowadays with less alcohol. Just love going to EDM shows and seeing the crowd and everyone united. It's such a different vibe. I want to put eyes or dots to my uncompleted eyes with my last reasoning about alcohol and childhood. I think it's like solidifying the fact that you can break rules. When you get drunk, is really chaotic and it's like F all the rules, right? It's and then you smoke and it's like, yeah, really, I don't have any barriers. So, and us humans, especially rebellious or entrepreneur, old folks, we love to push the limits and see how far we can go. And in my case, well, I'm lucky that I just got this car here and a bit of legal trouble from my time. But do you think like that going out in these nightclubs and bars, do you think it's really a phase of life that's necessary to solidify your adulthood?
I think it's interesting. I mean, kids of today, especially Gen Z, those different sort of Gen Z, Gen X, etc., all having different precepts on how they engage. And I think some of the challenges that we have to understand is generically, many of them are told no for a long time. So, no, you can't do this. You're not old enough. And I'll give you an example. If my father used to say to me, I was 17 years old, and he said, well, you can't go and do that because you're not 18 yet. But he would also, in the same breath, say, you need to be doing this because you're nearly 18, but I'm the same age. So the reality is the context of how you're being addressed creates this piece or this frustration that makes you explode almost out of the blocks. And what we've found is the experience of 18 to 21-year-olds is a very short-lived experience in terms of clubs, bars, restaurants, etc. They go out, they have their first taste of experience, they really sort of settle and understand where those youth pieces are. And then after 21, they have a longer period of commitment to environments that they enjoy because they're more intelligent in terms of their selection. But I think the one thing that we are seeing now is much more non-alcoholic drink use, and also a very more intelligent palate in terms of the selection of drinks. It tends to be a longer drink than a short drink. Gone are the days of so many people in vertical bars where they were just downing shots. And I mean, that does happen, don't get me wrong, but not to the extent it used to be. There's a much more sort of Mediterranean social environment, and particularly food has influenced that. Things like street feasts, these hawker houses that we see that have exploded over here. So for us, I mean, those environments have bottomed out, but they've also spread with different tastes. So you've got people who go to a live music venue and being committed, people who go out all night that will go to electronic music, but also those people who go between 5 and 11 in the evening, go with a group of friends, have some food, have some drink, and merrily walk home and not be so contested. I mean, Annie Mac, interestingly enough, is promoting this pre-midnight shows that she's doing. And what she's saying is clubbing doesn't have to be late. It can be early doors. So there's some interesting, and day parties are starting to become more prevalent as well. So I think there is an expansion of different product base and choices of products that are being selected, but the offering is growing because everyone's trying to look at different parameters to explore. And I think it can be an exciting time. We've got a really entrepreneurial, spirited group of people within our sector, and the UK is renowned for it. But you know, we've been tested to the max without a doubt over the last 3 or 4 years.
Right. Yeah. So many analogies going on in my head. Like, oh, if you go with like a less strong alcohol with new generations, are they going to go the same in business, like less risky? Because me and my friends, it was all about like downing shots, and it was really, really extreme, like who would get past all the quickest. And that kind of reflects my high risk taking style up to this day. Then it was like, was it a whole therapy for me this time? Because when I was young, I was always put outside of the class, as the class clown, and the system really rejected me. So was this like a time in which I externalized all that pain? So it gets me thinking. And when it comes to innovation, well, yeah, that's really exciting. I've seen, well, caffeine could be certainly a drug of choice, to keep you awake. And there's a whole bunch of adaptogens that you can take while clubbing. There's also microdosing that's taking some velocity. It's not about getting like super wasted. Obviously, there's CBD, and cannabis in Canada has been legalized. And yeah, innovations all over the place. I had a guy on my pod in London. Actually, he did these gaming pubs in which you would just game, with an old Nintendo 64 and rent per hour. So yeah, the array of experience is super interesting. Like you said, there might not be a time. What other innovations are you seeing right now being implemented?
Well, I mean, there's lots of innovations that we've been seeing. I mean, there's things like two-way streaming happening at the moment. One of the biggest challenges with streaming is because everyone was doing it for free, there was no monetization. So now what's happening is where streaming has become prominent, there is this two-way streaming where people are trying to monetize off expanding the audience with an online and physical experience audience. There's a lot of work going on in terms of euphoric environment change. So, for instance, using the control of temperature within the air to dictate euphoria in different ways. So, we're not just talking about light and sound, we're talking about touch, but using the temperature change. There are some work going on at the moment that I've heard of physical club experiences and then multiple digital or streamed experiences so that the streaming mechanism is much stronger. So almost a building could have one physical club experience with 3 or 4 streamed experiences across different genres, which would monetize as well. So I think there are lots of things out there that are quite interesting. VR is going to play a part at some point, I'm sure, although there are still boundaries with it. So I think there's a lot out there at the moment. I don't think anything at the moment. I'm comforted in feeling that the physical experience is not going to be something that will be taken away as of yet. But I do believe that that virtual experience and that digital experience will start to then encompass some level of audience where people are obviously hooked on gaming with Gen Z. The one thing I would say to you, though, and this is the interesting part, I think our challenge is we've spent literally the whole of the pandemic making sure people could get food at home, making sure they could get drink at home, making sure they can access their loved ones, listen to music, socialize, etc. So we've had to turn the clock fourfold to get them out again. And some people have been a little bit tougher to get away. But I think one of the big challenges I think we've faced, that we've consistently faced, and I see it in my children and other people's children, is we've got a lot of conscious bystanders. And we have, for instance, in the old days when they used to have raves in fields, and I used to follow someone out off the back of a piece of paper with something scribbled on it, where we go and set up a sound system and 500 people party until the police stop it. The one thing you took from that is the community was very strong. What they did is if someone hurt themselves or fell down or there was an issue, the community would pick you up and make sure you were all right. The challenge we have now is there are too many conscious biases, too many fears for engagement. And then the other thing is where you've got, say, a field of people staying at a festival, 500 tents, what you tend to find is they all set up their tents, then walk away and go, someone else will sort that out for us. So they've got no consideration for anything else. And you see that with kids' bedrooms these days. I mean, let's be honest about it. They just walk away and leave the bedroom in a mess. And the next thing you know is you're tidying it up or mum's tidying it up. So I think we've got some issues with engagement. And I think we've got some issues with conscious bystanding, which I think is not helping our communities at the moment, particularly in the evening and night.
So Tomorrowland, for example, there's tents that are being set up and so forth, but they also make a huge effort to unify their community. And I would argue that they're successful. Have you studied them? And can we use them as a case study to create communities?
Oh, without a doubt, Tomorrowland do a great job of it. I mean, Glastonbury do a great job of it. Glastonbury is in, with all intents and purposes, is a hippie festival that's grown and grown and grown. When I talk about our communities, I'm talking about cities and towns and regular week in, week out, not festival season one offs or one off Tomorrowland. We're talking about a change in the way people approach communities and each other. To get them to, and I put it like this: it's a very easy one. If you say, listen, if you don't behave yourself or you don't stick to the code of conduct, you're not going to be able to come to Tomorrowland or Glastonbury. That's a big carrot. So for us, what we need to do is start to engage in everyday engagement and everyday sort of way that people deal with each other. So I
Right.
agree. I think Tomorrowland and the likes of Glastonbury definitely have some really positive things that can work, but I don't think it's the answer to some of the bigger issues that we have in society.
Yeah, and smaller pockets of air and communities. It's challengeful because yeah, when I would go and to these bars, I would not have much respect for the facilities, and was kind of individualistic. That's how I was raised, like don't socialize too much with others. Although I was a social being under the influence. But yeah, that's an interesting problem to solve. Michael, where can people find out more about you?
Well, the best place to probably pick up from me is LinkedIn, just Michael Kiel on LinkedIn, or you can drop into our website on our association at www.ntia.co.uk and can gain some contact from there. But okay.
Thank you so much, man.